Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today and speak on a topic that is very dear to my heart, that I've spent a lot of time on this year about, but one that is moving forward. And thanks to all of the patients and patient advocates and others who are here today to talk about this much-needed topic and to review some of the latest research that is ongoing for patients. So we say the moonshot, and moonshot, what does it mean and where? And I will discuss some of those things today and the potential impact on gastric cancer and for gastric cancer patients. This isn't moving.
Can you please help us forward to the next slide? Thank you.
Hopefully they will get the slides moving. Okay. Oh, too fast. The Vice President's Cancer Moonshot Blue Ribbon Panel has really been active in 2016. And you say, why moonshot? In 1961, when President Kennedy challenged the astronauts to get a man to the moon and bring him back, in less than a decade, we know that this was accomplished 1969, so less than a decade. And this was presented in his State of the Union address in January. In January of this year, President Obama challenged the cancer world to do what it planned to do in 10 years in 5. And he said he was putting Joe in charge of mission control. So Vice President Biden has met with many individuals around the country. He selected a group of 28 individuals to provide some of the science for the mission. And I am very pleased to have been selected as one of the 28. So what are the goals of the moonshot? It is really to accelerate progress in cancer. And this includes not only cancer treatment, but prevention, understanding cancer, and screening so that we can treat those who might be at risk with preventive strategies, but also to diagnose cancers at a much earlier stage. And therefore, the moonshot covers everything from the cutting-edge research in the laboratory as well as prevention research, screening research, and others. So it involves the entire standard of care from basic research all the way through cancer survivorship and relief of symptoms, either from the cancer or from results of the treatment. One of the efforts was to break silos such that we are encouraging cooperation between many individuals and many organizations. I'll explain some of that later. So it's making sure that academic institutions, government, private institutions, all are working together and sharing data and thereby allowing for earlier completion of clinical trials. This represents the workflow for the moonshot. It is administered through the Vice President's office at the White House. There is a federal task force, and the federal task force is different from the Blue Ribbon Panel, which I was a part of. The federal task force brings together all of the federal agencies that have any relationship to cancer, either treatment or research or possible other avenues. For example, NASA is a part of it. NASA has extremely critical research facilities that can be utilized for cancer research, the Veterans Administration, the Energy Administration, so Housing, Health and Human Services, all of these agencies coming together to make sure that anything that a federal agency can contribute to this initiative will be there, and all the federal agencies will be working together. What this allowed for was information sharing. For example, NIH and the National Cancer Institute had never worked with NASA, or there were limited relationships, I should say. I guess I should never say never. But bringing them together really allowed for a lot of information sharing between agencies and allowing people to work together who had never even known the resources available in the other. So that's the Federal Task Force. Now, the Federal Task Force reports directly to the Vice President's office. Within NIH and National Cancer Institute, which is where I come in here, the National Cancer Advisory Board was established as a means of providing information and directions to NIH and to the National Cancer Institute. The Blue Ribbon Panel is here, and with the Blue Ribbon Panel, while there were 28 members, all of the members had other individuals working, so that there were working groups with the Blue Ribbon Panel. So lots of individuals who have significant information that can contribute to the cancer initiatives. These are the goals of the Federal Task Force, so the federal agencies. So they were to support greater access to research, to data, computational capabilities, and others, and improve patient access to care, identify and address unnecessarily regulatory barriers, et cetera. And what I mean by that, for example, the FDA was a major part of the federal task force, and in order to provide new discoveries to patients earlier, it was very important to have all of these individuals sitting at the table together so that barriers and challenges could be addressed early. So it's basically breaking down silos and making sure individuals are talking with each others, that there is resource sharing, and thereby information on all of the opportunities brought to the table. There were some strategic goals to reach these. I won't go through all of them, but the basic idea is to break silos, bring everybody together so that we're all speaking the same language. We all know the extent of resources provided by each, as well as challenges and any regulatory considerations that needed to be addressed. My slides, there we go. So here we come to the Blue Ribbon Panel. The purpose of the Blue Ribbon Panel was really to provide the expert advice on the vision that has been proposed, such that the scientific goals are identified and verbalized, as well as implementation strategies. So this was the scientific support for the group. These are the Blue Ribbon Panel members. I know there are a lot of people. I have identified 3 of us who are also on the National Cancer Institute's clinical transformational and translational team. So again, a group of individuals who are well known in cancer research as well as cancer advocacy on the Blue Ribbon Panel. And the charge to the panel from the Vice President, which represents the President's goal for this group, that the panel may call upon special consultants, assembly of ad hoc work groups, anyone that we thought we needed on the team working with us to identify strategies, to identify implementation methods. And we had 7 working groups that were determined by all of the input from the various entities. We also had a website where we could get information, and we had over 1,600 suggestions and information given on this website that we read through, and we condensed, worked together, and we came up with 7 working groups. And each working group then could add additional people from around the country to that working group to make sure that we had ample information and ample input. So once that was determined, we also had scientific as well as community outreach activities. We had meetings around the country to get information from not only academic institutions, but community, clinicians, patients, patient advocates, groups, anyone that had information and wanted to contribute some information we listened to. And there were groups all around the country listening and gaining information. We also had telephone lines into the National Cancer Institute where there were telephone calls. So we had over 1,600 ideas presented. So 7 working groups, and we asked each working group to bring forth 2 major suggestions. So these were all compiled and 14 recommendations brought forward. What we did, 13 of those recommendations were accepted as plans and goals, and 2 of them actually came together as a working group, but also as a report that could be instituted immediately. These themes worked across every single one of the 7 groups. So many of us, many individuals ask us as we talk about this around the country, well, you don't have a prevention strategy. As I mentioned, we're breaking silos. So there are prevention strategies across all of the areas. There's health disparities research across all of the areas, so that we have had individuals say to us, well, you don't have anything on disparities. Yes, we do, and disparities is a topic that's woven throughout. Prevention, a topic woven throughout. Biomarkers, technology, you've heard a lot from speakers today on biomarkers, technology, immunotherapy. Those topics are all woven throughout, so you won't see a specific biomarker technology. And I'll share some of that with you very shortly. So the summary of recommendations, I will go through some of these. One is a network to direct patient engagement. For many patients, the patient nor the physician taking care of the patient understand where to get all of the information for clinical trials, where to get the biomarkers, how to pay for the biomarkers being done. And it is our vision that every patient with cancer have access to where the biomarkers can be done, will be done, and that they're done early in the patient's management scheme. Many times the markers are done as a last-ditch effort after other trials and treatments have been done. So we envision that, number one, this be done very early. Number two, that we have a computerized data management system such that the physician and the patient can reach the clinical trials associated with those biomarkers, and that the clinicians who are doing the research have access to this data system, such that many times when we're doing research, we would love to get patients onto our protocols, and we keep waiting and waiting and waiting for the right patient to come through. But if there's a data management system where the patient's tumor information is there with the clinician, that researcher can then reach the clinician, tell them about their clinical trial, and thus that allows for better patient access, better research access so that we can finish these clinical trials much earlier, and then the data management system such that researchers can communicate with each other. So you have a BRCA positive patient, someone in San Francisco, you can easily communicate with that person regarding the research aspects without any loss of HIPAA or other patient information. So that's one of the areas. Cancer Immunotherapy Translational Science Network, that's the second. And that is, again, have a network of immunotherapy clinical trials, the requirements for those trials so that they're easily accessible, and data can be shared such that researchers with similar ideas can work together more easily. The next is the therapeutic target identification to overcome drug resistance. You've heard earlier today where patients' tumors respond to therapy, and then there is the development of resistance. And therefore, with resistance, again, patients' tumors information with the resistance mechanisms can be shared with other researchers, and therefore strategies to overcome resistance being modified, studied, and data shared over a safe network. So not only introduce these studies to overcome resistance, but share the information so that they're easily accessible by the patient's treating physician, and the researchers whose research is based in those areas. Creation of a national cancer data ecosystem, and that is, there are great computers at many different healthcare institutions throughout the country, and many times they can't communicate with each other. So a mechanism of translation such that our computer technology allows us to communicate in an effective manner. Next group is in pediatric tumors. It's recognized that in pediatric tumors, they're very different, and fusion oncoproteins being very important. So that's an area. An area where I've worked for many years is that of symptom management research. And I've talked to this group many times about the challenges of patients with stomach cancer in terms of symptoms related to the cancer, symptoms related to the surgical management, and the overall treatment strategies. So symptom management research, which allows us to accelerate the development of guidelines for management of problems associated with cancer or its treatment, and therefore allowing greater adherence to treatment measures and therefore better care of the patient, and that goes all the way into survivorship. And this, of course, will allow for better adherence to treatment strategies, but also sharing that information so that patients around the country have access to the information. And then precision prevention and early detection, which are very important in many cancers, including stomach cancer. We'll also look at tumor biospecimen banks to analyze that. We'll create a human atlas of the various tumors and the alterations observed in those tumors, such that we have sharing of information between clinicians and the patients as well as the researchers. So data sharing. And then new technologies. It is anticipated that there will be more opportunities for mouse models where patients' tumors can be injected into the mice or other animals, and thereby knowledge of resistance mechanisms as well as effective strategies that could potentially be important for patients. So those are the research strategies. Now, one that we thought was very ready for prime time and that could be established quickly was that of the Lynch syndrome demonstration project. Many times we think about Lynch's syndrome in relationship to colon cancer. Perhaps a few people know about endometrial cancer. Most individuals, including clinicians taking care of cancer patients, don't realize that there are other cancers that are part of Lynch's syndrome and therefore very important. One of them being gastric cancer, breast cancer, pancreatic cancer, and others. So the idea is to establish a national strategy focused on colorectal cancer and endometrial cancer, which there are definite models available, and then identifying other cancers that could be a part of that, the mechanism of inheritance of the cancers, and therefore more information for patients with other cancers, including those of the esophagus, the stomach, and the pancreas especially. Pediatric demonstration project for immunotherapy was another identified as demonstration projects. So it was felt that these would be our first projects to start because there are already so much data as well as guideline information. The problem, however, is the guidelines for Lynch's syndrome are not universally utilized throughout the country, and therefore establishing standards and guidelines. So our next steps, of course, are implementation. Where do we go? The Moonshot program will be administered from the Office of the Director of the National Cancer Institute. And that has been set into strategies that are already in the movement at this time. So the next steps, the NCI will establish the implementation approaches and so forth. One of the things that was critical to this research, as well as any research, is the appropriations. And that, of course, was dependent on the Congress. The president had given initial funds to support the infrastructure to establish this, but the actual funding for continuation needed to come from the Congress. And I am so pleased to say that this was included in the 21st Century Cures Act, which covers over $6 billion in legislation. And I actually had to change my slides because this was approved by the House first and then approved by the Senate the 7th of December, so just this week. And it is approved. Not only approved, but there was bipartisan working together with one of the Republican senators, actually from my previous home state. I was born in Tennessee, but Senator Lamar Alexander from Tennessee was really very, very industrious about getting this legislation through. So it was bipartisan, passed the Senate with a vote of 94-5, and the House 392-26. So this was really challenging to get this information through. I learned a lot in terms of how do you bring together the scientists, the legislators, advocates, and everybody working together. So it is headed to the president, and the word is that President Obama will sign it before he leaves for Christmas vacation. So this is a great opportunity for everyone involved with cancer, and that's really the whole United States, because whether you're a patient advocate, a researcher, a clinician, someone that you know has been affected by cancer. So bringing all of the avenues together to approach this so that we're accomplishing the next 10 years of research in 5 years. And this is bringing information from the laboratory, from the bench, to the patient. It involves bringing everybody together. A major part of that is the FDA, so that the FDA, pharmaceutical companies, are involved at the time of definition that a process may be a potential winner. So it's bringing everybody together. So what do we have to do next? Continued investment in investigator-initiated research, making sure that research is available to the patients, and making sure that the information on which patients might be the best beneficiaries of research will be important. And the information technology to allow the sharing of information, all a part of this. So this is our blue ribbon panel here meeting together. I think that's me in the orange. But note that this is the FDA commissioner and others sitting around the table together to determine how this should move forward. So I thank you for listening to me today, and I hope everybody here will leave thinking of what is it you may do to enhance the efforts of the Moonshot Blue Ribbon Panel, speaking with those in your neighborhoods, in your communities, but if there are needs in the future, speaking with your congressional representative or whoever you need to, based on the ongoing efforts at that time. So this legislation that passed this week will not be the last. We're going to need additional funding to carry out all of the mechanisms. But if everybody can leave here today thinking of Moonshot, then my task will have been accomplished. Thank you so much.